Now to talk about this renewed cooperation between Russia and China, my old colleague from the United States House, Pete Hoekstra, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Pete, thanks for joining us for this daily intelligence brief. What do you make of this? A union of opportunity or something that was surprising?
No, I think this is a union of opportunity. Both China and Russia, want to have global plans. They're expansionists. I mean, take a look at what China's doing, the South China Sea, putting the oil rig in Vietnam waters or disputed waters, the actions and the activity that they've had in the last, really in the last 5 to 7 years going into Africa. China, rather than looking inward, is looking outward. Putin obviously is in a position where he's looking for friends, he's looking for investors. So right now I think it's a relationship of opportunity. They see a weak America, they see a weak Europe, and they think, hey, let's take advantage of this and let's move as quickly as we can. So, is this a fundamental shift with China and Russia? Not necessarily. Could it lead to a fundamental shift in their relationships and bringing these two countries back together? Yes.
Pete, one thing comes to mind, and we've not had a chance to talk about this. When we last got together, you talked about the Russians restricting sales of rocket engines to the United States. In the interim, we've also heard that Russia is basically going to keep Americans out of the International Space Station, or try to, since we're dependent on hitching rides from the Russians in terms of getting our astronauts into space with their cosmonauts. That is problematic, to say the least. But it prompts this question in my mind. We have seen China now take some impressive steps into space. Do you believe this cooperation might actually come in space travel as well, between the Russians and the Chinese?
It could. The Chinese have the money. The Russians have a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience going into space. So, yeah, I think it could go to lots of other areas. I think the real thing here, what you had in your lead-in, JD, that I think a lot of companies in the West are going to be very interested in. Chinese companies investing in the natural resources that Russia has. I mean, for a while, a lot of American companies saw this as a huge opportunity for them to develop their businesses and grow their businesses. They would hate to see that those opportunities move over to China. So I think those are all possibilities, and none of them are good for the West, and none of them are good for the U.S. But it all comes again out of the perception that China and Russia see a weak West, and they're taking advantage of us. And in reality, it's not only a perception, there's a reality. We are weak in terms of influencing, and we are not exerting global leadership.
Pete, as I sit here and think about this, and I'm reminded of the rules for investment for overseas companies in China, where a company from the United States, for example, has to surrender a majority of its holdings in that country, 51% at least, to the Chinese government. I wonder what President Putin will do if he'll try to use those same rules that China has used for foreign investment with the Chinese coming into Russia, or given the economic straits in which Russia could find itself, will China be able to cut better business deals in terms of investment in Russia?
I'd bet on the Chinese. I think Putin needs them more than what the Chinese need Russia. China, they've got their eyes. They've been looking south. They've been looking to Africa. They've got lots of global opportunities. They've been looking to the Middle East. Russia right now is something that probably wasn't on their radar screen. They're probably glad that it is, but I think they're going to be able to cut better deals going into Russia than what U.S. companies can cut going into China.
Well, you touched on other areas where Chinese influence continues to grow. You mentioned Africa. And Pete, it seems more often than not, in the wake of you offering a daily brief on Africa about a week ago, it's more and more in the news. A story from the Sudan, a Sudanese court sentencing a pregnant Christian woman to death for renouncing Islam. this notion of religious persecution. I don't know if you can define it in terms of our compelling national interest, but as a human rights story and the implications of what this means in the Sudan, tell us from an intelligence perspective when we hear of this kind of persecution internationally, especially in the Sudan.
Well, what you're hearing right now, you're not hearing a lot from the U.S. at all. It's a continuation of, religious persecution. And this is not Islamophobia, but in Muslim-dominated countries, especially those that have a kind of a radical bent. We're seeing it in Iraq, where Christians and Jews, whatever Jews were left in Iraq, facing increasing persecution. We're seeing it in Egypt. We're seeing it in Syria, and now this is another example where we're seeing it in Sudan. I mean, when America is not leading, not only do we face challenges militarily, economically, but really the world loses the strongest and what used to be the most clear and articulate voice for human rights. All of this religious persecution that has been going on in America has primarily been silent. And the story is not even this woman renouncing Islam. As I understand it, J.D., this was a girl, a young woman who, she was born, had a Muslim father, had a Christian mother. The father left. This girl grew up as a Christian. She's now a Christian, but under Sharia or Muslim law, because her father was Muslim, she therefore is a Muslim, even though she was raised as a Christian, and that's what they're calling her renouncing her Muslim faith. It's absolutely outrageous. In America, we ought to be speaking out with clarity and forcefully that this is totally unacceptable behavior, and we not only need to be talking against persecution, but we need to be talking forcefully about human rights and religious freedom, and that's just been missing.
Which leads us to another African nation in a similar situation, en masse, if you will, Nigeria. I understand the U.S. has allowed drones and manned surveillance aircraft to check out what's going on there, trying to find these girls. We're hearing that large group of kidnapped young girls may have been separated into smaller groups. How long do you believe the United States will continue these surveillance and search efforts?
No, I think there's a real strong commitment there to, until this situation is resolved, and whatever the resolution may be. The Nigerian government is reportedly, at least in discussions with elements of this group, so maybe you'll have a prisoner swap. Maybe at some point there will be, an attempted raid to free these young girls. It's going to be extremely difficult. Nothing is easy here, but I think now that the U.S. and others are involved in this, we will be involved until there is some kind of a resolution. It's just very hard to predict what that resolution is going to be. I would be putting, even though our special forces are very, very good in our intelligence and resources are better than anybody else in the world, this is a very difficult terrain, a difficult problem. You've got lots of hostages. This may go the route of, as ugly as it may be, but it may be the only way to get these girls back. This may go the negotiated route and a prisoner swap.
Well, that would certainly give Boko Haram more prominence and success. But I hear what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And Pete, you told us in our last visit, you said don't be surprised if this moves into negotiation. And as our viewers get a look at, quite frankly, this deranged man who seems to be in command of Boko Haram, not a signal I'd like to see, but as you point out, in terms of information and reconnaissance, not a lot to go on, and given the on-again, off-again nature of the Nigerian government, that's another difficulty there. Pete Hoekstra, as always, we appreciate your input in terms of the daily intelligence brief, and we look forward to your next visit here on America's Forum.
Great. Thank you, J.D.
So Pete says, don't be surprised if the Nigerians negotiate to get those girls back. John McCain talks about sending in America's special forces. What do you think? Why don't you tweet me your comments at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. There's also email and Facebook, and we're coming back.